Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Learning Not Lakhs. Purpose and personal growth are more powerful than bigger offices or larger paychecks. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Dave Ranson, Managing Director at Moog India Technology Center. Dave Ranson began his aerospace industry career in 1981 with Moog Inc. In the ensuing 30-plus years, he has been responsible for developing leading-edge technology for several major aircraft programs. 15 of those years, he has worked as a senior manager, leading the design, development, and the qualification of flight-critical aircraft components with responsibilities spanning the US, UK, Brazil, and India. Dave is a professional mechanical engineer registered in the state of California. His education includes a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Southern California, an MS in Mechanical Engineering from the State University of New York at Buffalo, and a Presidential MBA degree from Pepperdine University. As Managing Director of the Moog India Technology Center, Dave has guided the development of critical engineering competencies and a qualification test laboratory, as well as achieving AS9100 certification. Current projects include embedded flight control software and electronics, flight control actuation components, and qualification testing for the Boeing 787 and Airbus A350. Moog's India Technology Center is now a center of innovation for key technologies that support aerospace, automotive, and industrial controls. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Mr. Ranson.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I've been looking forward to talking with you this afternoon and sharing with you about aerospace careers and about how you can prepare for them. Our title is Learning Not Lakhs. You can tell your friends today, though, that we're going to be spending a good amount of time on the real practical stuff of how do you get the interview and how do you get the job. Real quickly, just a little bit about Moog. We're a worldwide designer, manufacturer, and integrator of precision motion control products and systems. What that means is anything that requires precise motion control is where Moog plays. Military and commercial aircraft, satellites, launch vehicles, wind energy, even medical equipment. Aerospace has come a long way from the first flight in 1903. The Wright brothers were actually very capable engineers who were understanding the principles of flight for the very first time. They were the first ones to be able to actually control the three axes of flight control: pitch, roll, and yaw. Before their discoveries and their experiments, this was not well understood at all, and because they understood these principles of physics, they were successful in flying. Since then, there's been amazing progress. Today, it's not just flying a few hundred yards. Today, we talk about the most complex systems ever imagined, from twin-rotor, tilt-rotor aircraft to satellites to the most sophisticated fighter aircraft and passenger aircraft, all part of aerospace. Today, I'd like to just talk with you a little bit about the aerospace domain as a career before we get into the practical. Aerospace is a lot of fun when it gets right down to it. We get to work with the latest technologies. In some cases, we're asked to invent new technology, and once in a while, we get to be part of making history. As in the case of the light combat aircraft for India, the LCA, now called Tejas, Moog provides the primary flight controls and leading-edge vortex control actuation for that aircraft. A real triumph for India. As we talk about preparing for a career in aerospace, I'd like to talk with you perhaps just a little bit philosophically. This quote, I think, is very profound for all of life, not just aerospace. Real success is finding your life work in the work that you love. And in aerospace, we have the privilege of spending our lives working on exciting projects with technology that we love. I would go so far to say that the most satisfying careers are driven by purpose and passion, not by the pocketbook. Hence the title for today's talk of Learning Not Lakhs. Let me ask you, why did you choose engineering? I suspect it's because you enjoy solving technical problems, and possibly because you can see that engineering would be a profitable career path for you. Good for you on both counts. If solving technical problems is your primary motivation for choosing engineering, then I'd suggest that aerospace might just be the place where you could find a life work in work that you love. Now, getting into aerospace is not easy. You have to be good with math and science, you know that. And it takes hard work to prepare. Hiring is also very selective because there are few positions available, and so competition is keen. I like this slide because it shows so many parts of aerospace, from UAVs to jets to test equipment to satellites. All of these require that we bring together key engineering disciplines to develop complex control systems to meet extreme demands of aerospace. You may not be aware, but the temperatures of aerospace applications, for instance, even just aircraft, can go to minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit to plus 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Not easy to design for. What this requires is a cooperation and a collaboration between engineering disciplines. And over the years, this has developed in what's called a systems engineering approach. Aerospace requires that we understand control theory. Engineers all work together to optimize the system, whether it's a satellite or a launch vehicle or a jet aircraft. And this has come to be known as systems engineering, where we have common requirements definition and a process to bring all of the disciplines together. So in aerospace, there's a place for any of the engineering disciplines, even chemical engineering. We'll just talk briefly about kinds of work or tasks in aerospace. System requirements and architecture definition is it's a front-end activity, very challenging. Systems engineering is a big part of that. But each of these bullets represent a different type of engineering discipline, and I'm confident that if you really are intrigued by aerospace and you love solving technical problems, that one of these 7 domains will find you will be interesting to you and challenging. Product design and analysis, product development, which takes the design and actually makes it practical. Let's turn it into hardware and integrate a system that actually meets the requirements. Testing and certification is a very challenging area because that is the final protection for in aircraft, the passengers being safe when they're flying in the aircraft. Other disciplines that are today sometimes art, sometimes science, reliability, maintainability, and safety engineering all have very disciplined, rigorous science behind them, as well as still some art. Manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, critical, practical pieces of turning ideas into actual products that fly. And then, of course, project management to bring everything together as a business, because ultimately aerospace has to be a business to be able to provide a cost-effective product to the customer and be able to support those like us who are working in the business. You can enjoy great success in a career in aerospace, and you can make a good living without becoming a senior manager. And I'd just like to spend one moment on that, because many of you, as engineers, may be more interested in the engineering than a managerial path. In some companies, such as Moog, the technical career path is valued just as highly as the managerial path. And that's important because it allows the technical person to have the same exciting possibilities in their career. At Moog, the designation of principal engineer is respected and compensated as highly as the engineering section head. The message here is you can be very successful as a techie. The reason that works, especially at Moog, is because of our values. It's not about titles or position. It's about the job that you do. At Moog, this is stated as competence is king, meaning that whether you're a fresh engineering graduate or an experienced engineering manager, all of us gain respect for being good at what we do, not our title. Now, that has some very important meanings for the person on the technical path because it requires that you have deep knowledge of the products. And it requires that you have sound engineering judgment. And those only come with experience. Aerospace products are some of the most sophisticated, complex products in the world. And the design, development, certification process usually takes at least 3 years and maybe as long as 5 years. It can take years for a person to gain the deep product knowledge that's needed to advance to the most senior levels. So career paths for true aerospace companies look much different than an engineering service company career. And that's good for you. Aerospace careers are more slow and steady. There's a solid, steady growth in salary, and the freedom, this is important, the freedom to learn and to grow deep in your domain. Hence, the title for our slide here, Learning Not Lakhs. In an aerospace company like Moog, you have unique opportunities to build long-term relationships with global experts, and this is really important here, because for some, it's very satisfying that they are able to build a reputation for themselves in an international aerospace community. In aerospace, you're one among hundreds, not one among tens of thousands. And so the relationships and the reputation that you build are very strong and very unique. Ultimately, the key word in aerospace is patience, because the growth will be slow and steady, and the learning will take time, but it will be worth it. My advice is that whenever there's a choice, I would advise you to choose learning and growth, not just compensation. When you're choosing between career options, between companies, between assignments, if you have the freedom to choose, I would encourage you to choose learning and growth, not compensation, because learning is where the satisfaction is. The most important thing in your career, starting before you enter the first job and still important all through your career, is to stay curious. Albert Einstein, a famous physicist, said, the important thing is not to stop questioning. And here it's very interesting how philosophical this scientist is. He says one cannot help but be in awe when he contemplates the mysteries of eternity, of life, of the marvelous structure of reality. And then he says, never lose a holy curiosity. It's very interesting. A man who knew so much about the math and the physics, who was so profoundly affected by it. So stay curious. The most important thing, we are looking for more than academics. We're looking for problem solvers, not test takers. The problems that must be solved require fresh perspective, not the textbook answer. So the most important thing for your career success is stay curious. The most successful engineers in aerospace are the ones who want to understand the why of the question, not just the how for a specific answer. So I'm going to give you a few specifics here about what we look for when we're hiring candidates. And the first one starts off, as we just finished that last slide, with curiosity. We're looking for someone who is curious, who's eager to learn, prepared to make learning a priority from day one. Things you can do as you're getting ready is to look for assignments in your schooling, or perhaps if you're in your first job already, look for assignments that will provide learning and growth. Also, as early as you can, look for prospective coaches and mentors. Be prepared to learn as much as possible. Next, communication. I cannot emphasize this enough. This is often overlooked, but it is critical to your professional success. You need a professional writing style to succeed in a global aerospace company. You need to develop that as soon as possible and continue to develop over the course of your career. And then most visible and possibly most important is verbal communication, because regardless of how smart you are, if you cannot communicate verbally with your colleagues effectively, then you will not be as successful as others who do. So verbal communication is critical to your success in an aerospace firm. We're not just looking, though, for someone who's technically capable. We're looking for someone who has passion for this business. We value enthusiasm and commitment. The person who's willing to work hard in pursuit of a worthy goal because they're passionate about it. We know that that will end up resulting in a self-motivated candidate, someone who's not willing to wait just to be told what to do. They're willing to figure out what the next steps are. They're willing to take initiative. And one thing you could do in preparing for your interviews is volunteer for activities that allow you to display your skills, both the soft skills, the people skills, and the hard skills, technical skills. Also very important to us and to you in your career is to place the highest value on truth in every aspect of your work. I cannot emphasize that enough. That will be, if you will adopt that practice, it will support you well in your career. We are very interested in creative thinking and innovation. The problems we face today require new solutions. And we need people who can understand how to formulate new solutions and to make wise decisions when they're considering the options. Leadership is a critical skill in aerospace. And in the future, that is going to be an area where there is a great need. So we're looking for candidates who have demonstrated the ability to plan and organize and to energize a group to action. Things you could do would be perhaps organizing events for a large group of people. Maybe it's a company party, but something that requires you to negotiate, to motivate people, and to be flexible, because those qualities are very valued by many organizations, perhaps all. We're looking for candidates who inspire others. It might be something simple, like just getting a group together and convincing them to undertake an activity. Or it might be something profound, like inspiring coworkers to set higher goals for themselves and the team. That leads me to leadership development. We understand as an organization that leadership development is critical to our current success as a company and our survival as an industry in the future. At MUG, we have very specific expectations for leaders, and I need to be very clear here. This is the #1 requirement. It's not having an MBA, and it's not having a special leadership class. The #1 requirement, being a leader in an aerospace company like MUG, is you have to be very competent technically in your domain. That's the #1 requirement. And without that, you don't get the next opportunities. Because ultimately in the aerospace business, capable leadership requires understanding the product and the process. Once you've satisfied that, there are other things we look for particularly. Some of them I've mentioned already: initiative and ownership, someone who's willing to take responsibility to help the team succeed, getting things done through others. That means not just being able to plan and delegate, but also being able to persuade, a very important marriage of capabilities. And then finally, building relationships at all levels. Aerospace, and Moog in particular, are very relationship based in many times in many projects. In fact, the stronger the relationships, the fewer the forms you have to fill out and the fewer processes have to be formalized. So what should you do to prepare for an aerospace career in engineering? We're going to get to some very specific things here in a couple of minutes, but I'd like to talk at a little bit higher level, and my advice would be to learn one thing well. You should master the foundations of your engineering domain. If you really understand the why of things, the physics, and you have solid math skills, you'll do well. The best kept secret, let me share that with you. Aerospace companies like Moog look for an understanding of how parts are manufactured, how they're assembled and tested. Without that, it is common for an engineer to propose solutions, in quotes, that are either impractical because they're difficult to assemble or test, or costly because they're difficult to manufacture, or perhaps very expensive materials have been chosen. But the real secret to that, the way to get that understanding, is to get your hands dirty. And that may be something that you're surprised by, but in fact, that's a real key. Get your hands dirty. Take training in manufacturing technology. Learn about how things are assembled and tested. Work with the shop and with the lab to understand the challenges they face. It'll make you a better engineer. It'll mean the solutions that you propose in the future are more effective. Okay. It's time to text your friends, let them know we're getting ready to do the real practical stuff now about how do you get a job. How do you go about that? What's the practical approach to getting a job in aerospace? We'll start with the resume. Make sure your resume is easy to read and you put the important things first. Make sure you have an objective statement. Tell us what you would like to do in a simple statement at the top of your resume or your CV. And don't forget key elements like education, work experience, relevant courses, maybe an internship or a co-op that you've participated in. And here are a couple important bullets for you. You need to be prepared to discuss any item on your resume. You need to know it very well, and you need to be able to talk with confidence about each item. And please, be accurate. Don't list things that are not really an accurate description of your capabilities and experience. That can only hurt you if you do that. It's best to have a resume that you're confident in and really describes you well and describes your potential. Albert Einstein, the famous physicist, who I tend to quote frequently, said, "Whoever is careless with the truth in small matters cannot be trusted with important matters." And that's very important, even with the resume, because if there is something that's not quite true on your resume, then it colors the employer's opinion of you as a person. So just be very careful of that. Next, preparing for the interview. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about research, but this is up to you. Really, you need to understand the company and what it does, where it is, what its mission and vision are. You should try and understand the industry where it's most active. You should understand, if you're thinking of another area than Bangalore or your hometown, then you need to also understand the geography and what the weather and and all of those factors would do, how they would affect you. You need to understand the key aspects of the position. There are often job descriptions posted. You should understand what those are so that you can be sure you really are prepared for that position, that your experience and career goals align with that job description. Now here's one that some folks overlook and is actually very helpful. I would encourage you to rehearse. Have answers to basic questions ready. Things like, why do you want this job? Or there's another one that's common is, tell me about yourself, which is a chance to tell them exactly what you believe are your strengths and why you'd be good for the job. With today, you probably have a friend who has a video function on their camera. I would suggest that you do a video practice, or more than one. Have a friend or a relative help you with a mock interview just to get you comfortable answering the questions out loud. Appearance. I would encourage you to dress professionally. You don't need to go out and spend a lot of money on fancy clothes, but you need to be prepared with a nice shirt and slacks or dress that will present you as a professional. You need to ask yourself, how do I want to be perceived? The way you dress will give a very important message about who you are. And then, probably more for the young guys in the group than any, don't forget to take a shower. Just make sure you're ready in every way for this interview. Okay, some very practical things that actually make a big difference. Be punctual. You need to be 15 to 30 minutes early, period, no exceptions. That way, if there's a traffic jam or if there's some problem with transportation, you have time to react without being nervous and disheveled when you arrive. Please be courteous through all phases of the visit to the employer. Whether it's housekeeping staff or security or a manager, you never know who's forming an opinion about you. Also, if you can, try to relax and enjoy the moment of the possibility of presenting yourself to the employer. Verbal communication, just a couple of things. Don't use slang terms. Try not to use too many acronyms. No alphabet soup. Because the interviewer you're speaking with may or may not be familiar with all of the technical words that you use. Also be careful to speak distinctly. Don't use a lot of ums or you knows or likes, things that are fillers. It's best to just speak slowly and carefully and pause when you need to think of the next thought. That's fine. Bottom line, you need to speak clearly. And that's where the practice can be very helpful. Speaking clearly is one of your most important interview capabilities. Okay, a couple of nonverbal things. You need to be just aware of, don't tap your fingers or fidget, don't shake your leg. You want to make sure that your body language communicates being interested in the interviewer, leaning forward a little bit, nodding in understanding or agreement. Is your tone of voice agreeing with what you're trying to communicate? On the tour, you should act interested. There may be some things that are puzzling to you. It'd be good to ask a question. Nothing wrong with that. Meals, just be careful about what you eat, that you don't end up with something that's going to make a mess on your shirt or your dress. Next up, your answers. Are you with me still? I'm excited about this information for you because these really are the things that can make the difference between you being noticed out of the hundreds of applicants. another reason for doing some practice interviews is it helps you with your answers. You need to anticipate some of the questions that you might be asked. You might buy a book. Go down to Landmark or one of the bookstores, pick up a book on how to do an interview. And they'll list often some typical questions. Things like, tell me about yourself, that's often used. And that's an invitation to tell them about your strong points and how you are right for the job. The next one is very important. Listen to the full question. Even if you've thought ahead about how to answer their questions and you have some answers prepared, be very careful in the interview to listen to the full question. Don't interrupt the interviewer. Make sure you understand the question. And when you do answer, you need to give enough information to explain the point, but don't talk for hours. Don't give a dissertation. This is about communicating with precise terms in a reasonable amount of time. Here's a good point or a good tip. If you feel that there's just too much material to cover, try to quickly distill the most important 3 points of what you want to say. And then speak only to those 3 points. Don't try to cover everything. And don't be afraid to stop and think. It's okay to pause and reflect before you answer a question. And if you don't know the answer, say so. Don't make up the answer. If you're in a technical interview, which most of you will be anticipating some specific things that you should be aware of. You need to know fundamental concepts. We talked about that earlier. You need to understand the physics of your domain. You need to understand the basics so that when they ask you a question, you'll be able to think in terms of the fundamentals and present a logical answer. There are times when they'll be asking you to think about a conceptual problem, something you haven't faced before. Just remain calm and use the fundamentals to lead you through the answer. When you are answering, perhaps about work you've done or a project you've completed, give details. If they're asking you to propose an answer to a question, don't be afraid to give some key details. If you're too general or too vague, they'll assume you don't really know. If it works, you could bring a sample of your work, perhaps a free body diagram or something that's not sensitive or proprietary information, but would show that you you can communicate clearly both on paper or through a computer-generated document and verbally. Behavioral questions. Now, this is something you may not have dealt with in the past, but it's important to be aware that the interview is going to be thinking specifically that past behavior is a good indicator of future performance. And in general, that's true. So if you've been good about getting your assignments in on time in your schooling, if you've been careful to study and get good marks, then the employer will take that as an indicator that you'll be prompt with getting your work done, and you'll be conscientious about doing your best. When they're asking for an indicator of your past behavior, they're going to want specific instances and examples. It's better to say things you did, not to just indicate things you might do. They're looking for details, not theories. And of course, anytime you can be specific, it's better than using vague terms like usually or sometimes. The questions you ask can sometimes be the most important part of an interview. I'll be very candid there, because a good question can indicate not just interest, but also learning and a good grasp of the information. It's a great idea to ask about details regarding the position, the company culture, things that are related to how the job might be. But don't be too general, especially if it's information that's on their website or in the employment literature they've already given you. You should already have that information, and it doesn't do you any good to ask those questions. It actually can hurt you. And one very important point here on this last bullet is don't start talking about compensation or benefits early in the interview process. You don't want to give the impression that the only reason you want this job is because you want to make a big paycheck. The employer wants to know that you're interested in the work they do. Special case phone interviews, although many of these rules apply, there are also specifics that you should consider. For instance, if you're going to do a phone interview, find a quiet place where you can sit and focus, like I've done for this webinar. I'm in an office where I'm not being disturbed. You need that same benefit because you need to be able to be completely undistracted, completely able to think through without distraction the questions and the answers. Please don't use a cell phone. That can really be a problem. When your answer is interrupted by static or missing words, that's very frustrating for the interviewer. So I would encourage you, find a landline so that you're able to have an uninterrupted, smooth conversation. And one other thing about phone interviews is, although we already mentioned, even in an in-person interview, face-to-face, you need to elaborate on the answer to the question, but don't give them a dissertation. On the phone, it's even more critical. You need to be perhaps just a little bit more concise, because you won't be able to know if the interviewer is losing interest, because you won't be able to read their body language. You won't be able to see them losing eye contact or tapping their fingers. So just to be aware of the length of your answers. So wrapping up the interview, 3 important points here. These are very important. You need to make sure you know what the job is going to be, both what the requirements are and what the expectations are from you. You need to know that before you leave the interview. Number 2, ask for the job. There's nothing wrong with that. My colleague Peter Sergey, who helped me with some of these slides, tells me that only 1% of the candidates actually ask for the job. The interviewer wants to know, do you really want this job? And asking for it is a great way to let them know. And then the third thing is, by all means, thank the interviewer. Each of the people that you encounter during this interview process should receive a heartfelt, sincere thank you from you, because they've spent time out of their day to give you a chance to tell your story, and that is a big favor. They've done you a kindness that actually deserves a thank you. So follow up, creating a lasting impression. Let me emphasize here, what's left after you leave is only your resume and a vague impression that the interviewer has, perhaps some handwritten notes. But if you send a thank you note, email or typed is fine, you'll make an impression. There's something else there to remind them of you. And I'll just say that a handwritten card is the most effective, because it says you cared enough to do something personal, not just type out a quick email. The other thing that would be good is to follow up and ask, what's next? When will I hear from you? Perhaps that's even better in the end of the interview, but certainly in a follow-up letter you could just follow up and ask what the next steps are on their end and if there's anything you should be doing. Just a note here to thank my colleague Peter Sergey for some great help on this section, by the way. And if I could just underscore the fact that you should be proactive in following up on your interview. It's an indication of whether you are the type of individual who will be able to follow up with important items on the job. It indicates also if you sincerely do want the job or not. Okay, one last thing I don't want you to forget. I made the point that aerospace is challenging and exciting. I love aerospace. It's a lot of fun. But it's also serious business because lives are at stake. And that's something that's important to remember. That's why Albert Einstein's words are in particularly very important. Whoever is careless with truth in small matters cannot be trusted with important matters. And aerospace is very important. Aerospace demands truth and accuracy in every aspect, even when it's uncomfortable, because lives are at stake. We have to get it right. So in conclusion, as you prepare for a career in aerospace, I would encourage you to learn one thing well. Master the foundations of your discipline. And above all, stay curious. Never stop learning. Never stop wondering why. Because as I started out the presentation, what's important is learning, not lakhs. Thanks. I'll be happy to answer questions today here on the webinar, or you can also contact me on Twitter or at my website. I'll leave the contact information here. Thank you. We can do some questions now.
Well, thanks for the insightful presentation, Mr. Ranson. I have started assigning you the questions. You can quickly look up to them in the questions pane.
Great. Okay, I have a question from Anish, an IT professional in the customer relationship management industry, asking about managed services. Is it possible to shift to the aerospace industry from the managed services? Certainly. However, the important thing to do is, as an IT professional, is to realize that your expertise will be more focused on the support systems for an aerospace company, the IT systems for an aerospace company, as opposed to the embedded software. So yes, I think it is possible to make a transition. We have a question from Shivam. In most cases, the interview only has third-party staffing email IDs and not of the interviewer. How do you send a thank you mail to them? I have personally, and I would encourage you to ask the interviewer, how can I reach you? I'd like to send a small note after we talk. And they'll tell you. And then after asking that question, you should be sure you send the small note. We have another question from Shivam on how to improve professional writing skill. Well, there are several ways. One would be just taking a writing class, to take an evening class on writing. But there's no substitute for just doing a lot of writing. Perhaps you would take an assignment for a community newspaper, writing articles. Maybe there's a club that you belong to that needs a newsletter. Anything you can do that will encourage you to write regularly will help you to improve your professional writing skills. We have a question from Manjunat. What about the automotive domain? Manjunat, I'm not exactly sure, but I think you're asking a question about can you transition from the automotive domain to aerospace? And my answer would be yes. I think it's easier in some of the engineering disciplines than others, and it's certainly easier earlier in your career. Automotive has some of the same challenges that aerospace does with extreme environments and also with the challenge to do high performance engineering at a reasonable cost. There are some differences, but if you're earlier in your career, that shouldn't be a barrier. Another question. Why have I taken the example of the aerospace industry? This is a question from Sanjay. Well, the reason I chose aerospace is because that's what I'm most familiar with, Sanjay. I've been in the business for 30 years. I'm the MD for an aerospace company, and so I know this business very well, and I can talk with confidence about it. However, the things we've talked about today apply equally to other domains. The one comment I made, I think, holds for any career, that passion and purpose are more important than pocketbook. And you can't go wrong by emphasizing work that you care about and learning and growth as opposed to a slightly larger paycheck. I hope that answered your question. If not, please ask another. From Vidhu. Vidhu says, I'm planning to resign from my company due to some major conflicts with the way me and my manager works. Oh, I'm sorry for that. It's unfortunate. I've been here for 4 years. What's the best way to let him know and why? Oh, okay. Well, I don't know your specific situation. I would encourage you with two things. Number one is, anytime you leave an organization, you want to be careful to do so with poise. You want to be gracious as you leave. The phrase that's often used is, don't burn any bridges, meaning as you leave, don't hurt feelings or say things that would be later held against you. You want to try and leave with a positive feeling between you and your colleagues. The other thing I would suggest is that it's not your job, as you're leaving a company, it's not your job to try and fix the things that aren't working. And so I would resist the temptation to offer advice on how the owner of that business should change the way he does business. I think that can only be a negative for him and for you. Hope that helps. And I'm sorry for that, Biddu. I hope things go better for you. Pintu has a question about switching lots of companies for growth, and you're asking, I think, if that hampers your career. So, yes, I would say that's something to be very cautious of. One thing that an interviewer will be very conscious of is the number of times, or maybe a better way to say it is, how many years does an employee stay with a particular employer? If you're switching a number of times, for instance, in 10 years, if you've been with one employer for 10 years, that says you're stable. If you've been with 5 employers in 10 years, that says there's a question here. And the interviewer will wonder, is it because the employee has trouble getting along with people, or is the employee just moving to increase their salary, which you're posing, I think, here is your suggestion. And neither of those are viewed in a positive way by a recruiter. So I would say, yes, you need to be careful of that. We have another question here from Sanjay asking about the quote by Albert Einstein, ignorance of small things. I'm not familiar with that quote. I'm going to have to skip that one because I'm not sure I've heard that quote. I do one great quote from Albert Einstein that maybe you may be thinking of here is, he said that he felt his most important asset in his success as a physicist was his curiosity, not his education or his talent. And I thought that was a very interesting thing for him to say. Let's see. Just have to find the next question here. So Ashok has a question. Is there a possibility that a software engineer can change streams to aircraft design? Again, I think as the question was asked earlier about the automotive, that is possible. Earlier in the career makes it easier. In fact, aerospace and aircraft do use software. It's different. If you're a Java programmer or you're programming .NET framework, that's much different than embedded software in the aerospace arena. But there's no reason that you couldn't make the transition. You'd have to be willing to perhaps take a slight pay cut and start at a slightly lower level. But you could, I think, progress rapidly, because if you're a disciplined coder and you understand the architecture of building programs, then you could do very well. So I would say it's possible. Swapnil has a question. He says he's currently working in an IT company, but has a technical background in aeronautical engineer. At the time, it sounds like you switched to IT because of limited opportunities. Question is, are there chances now to apply in the aerospace field? The answer is yes. In India, in particular, aerospace is going to continue to be a strong domain, and there will continue to be strong opportunities. Keep in mind, it's going to be slow, steady growth, and you will have competition for these positions, because there are hundreds of positions, not tens of thousands. But it's definitely, I would encourage you to apply and investigate those possibilities. Robin Rao has a question. Please let me know, after finishing engineering in electronics, how can I move to the aerospace industry? Well, one thing I would encourage you to do, Robin, is to check the webinar that we did with the Times of India a few weeks ago on electronics. Talks in specific terms about that. But I would say today's presentation should get you 90% of the way there. You need to be focused on the fundamentals of your domain of electronics. And so understanding circuit design, if you have some exposure to FPGAs, that would be great, but not necessary. Disciplined design of electronic circuits is a great place to start. Understanding of digital electronics would be very helpful. But we don't expect you to know everything as you come to aerospace. We expect you to be curious, to want to learn. We expect you to be willing to work hard, and we'll help you from there. Hope that answers your question. If that doesn't, please ask another. A question from Yoga. Dave, is it necessary to satisfy everyone in the organization? Shall we pave our own way and traverse on that in both life and career? Oh, that's a good question, Yoga. Let me pause and think about that. I think it's a good question. Life is always a balance, Yoga. We, as individuals, will never, just speaking life in general, we will never be able to please everyone. That's a given. And so it becomes then a balance between being true to our ideals and getting along with others. And that's always a balance. I think in your career, in your profession, it's no different than in your personal life. And there are decisions that you can make that can minimize the conflict between being true to your own ideals and pleasing others around you. One of the important things is choosing a profession and an employer that is aligned closely with your values. For instance, if you believe that fighting in a war is wrong, if you're what some would call a pacifist, then it might not be a good idea for you to work for a weapons manufacturer. Choosing your path based on your knowledge of yourself is an important part of minimizing those conflicts. But I have in my career and in my life faced times when I had to say, to be true to myself, I'm going to have to do something counter to what my colleague would like to do. And then it's my job to work through that difficult time with my colleague with a gracious spirit and always with respect for my colleague. Hope that helps. Next one, Shivam has a question. At times, few questions are put to check your ego in the interview. How do you face those? Oh, good question. That's a good question. So one of the things the interviewer is trying to figure out is, I'm interviewing a smart person here. Are they so impressed with their own intelligence that they won't be a good team player? That's a real concern. So I think the number one preparation you need to do for that, answering that question is, before you go to the interview, to be sure that you are that you do have an appreciation for the intelligence of others around you, and that you are willing to recognize that you, as smart as you are, don't have all the answers. I think someone who answers a question in that spirit would be giving the right message to the interviewer. Hope that helps. Let's see. Tufel has a question. In aerospace, which are the sectors which are still unexplored in India? Where can we move forward to be an entrepreneur? Well, that's a good question. I'm going to have to say, off the top of my head right now, I don't have a good answer for that one. India has been making great progress in the last 2 decades, and so several areas India has made great advances. Things like UAVs and satellites, the ground vehicles for defense. They're all making good progress. Helicopters, I see good progress. I don't. Let me say this, just because I can't identify for you an area that's unexplored today doesn't mean there aren't great opportunities for an entrepreneur, because India is still young in the aerospace business, and even areas that are considered mainstream have lots of room for entrepreneurs to develop new components, to develop new processes, to just provide better service to the aerospace industry. Ajit has a question. What about managerial and business development role? Would be completing my PhD in management with a focus in business aviation. Oh, great. That sounds like that's been a fun degree. There are many opportunities for business development in aerospace. The Indian aerospace industry is set to take off in the next 5 years, and the business development role will be critical to making that happen. The companies who do the best will be the ones who address that business development function most effectively. The PhD in management with a focus on business aviation, I think, will give you a great understanding of the market and the challenges that we face. I think that some of the best learning is still ahead of you, though, to be real candid. because having taken an MBA myself and a technical master's, I realized that the theoretical and the case study and the pilot project are all very instructive, but they're nothing like the real world. And so I'm excited for you. You have an exciting career ahead. Good for you, and we'd love to hear how you do. Shivam has a question. Please help by suggesting what is an additional aspect that's been checked with somebody interviewed for a lead or manager role. I think the question you're asking me, Shivam, is if someone's being interviewed for a lead or a managerial role, what additional questions or capabilities will be expected? That's the question I'll answer. If that's not it, please, log back in with another question to make it clear. So, in particular, for leaders and managers, we're looking for someone who is a strong technical capability, someone who takes initiative, who owns the success of the project. For a team, if we see a team member who is dedicated enough to the team and the success of the team to perhaps do something that's not quite in their job description because they care about the team's success, that's an indicator there's a potential leader there. Very important when we're looking at leaders and potential managers is the ability to build relationships at all levels with peers, with direct reports, and with the most senior executives in the company. That's a critical capability, being able to build relationships. And then I would encourage you that if you're considering applying for a lead or a manager role, that you should be demonstrating that you can get the job done. And not just by doing it yourself, but by enlisting the help of others through a team. Hope that helps. Let's see. Tufel has a question. Willing to build my own industry in oils and petroleum fuels for aviation, but looking for an existing bigger company like Hindustan Oil. I feel if I will be able to sustain myself. Oh, okay. So the question you're asking is, I think, as an entrepreneur, clearly your questions have been aimed at that. You're a budding entrepreneur. Your question is, should I go it alone, or should I be looking for the sponsorship of a larger company? I'm going to have to defer on this one, Tufel, but I can give you an answer with what I'm familiar with. One place where you could potentially find a niche is as a broker, as someone who's the middleman between Hindustan Oil and the smaller companies that are using the product. That's a possibility. There's by providing excellent service and customized service to your customers that perhaps Hindustan Oil couldn't, you could find a niche there. But as far as advising you whether to try and go it alone or to get sponsorship, I'm gonna suggest that you ask others in the industry. Get to know some folks in the industry and understand how that works. Ask for their advice. Okay. So I think we've answered so far. We've answered the questions that have come up. Are there any others?
No, Mr. Dev, there are no other questions. That was all we
Okay.
had.
Thank you. Well, I first of all, thank you for doing such a nice job of moderating. Really appreciate your help. This has been very helpful. Really appreciated it. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. The questions were great. I hope that some of what we've said will help you in your career, whether it's aerospace or not, that some of these practical tips will help you to be just a little less nervous in your next interview, perhaps to be just a little bit more prepared. I hope that'll help you. If you have any questions you'd like to discuss, you can certainly contact me on Twitter or at my website. I'd be glad to continue the discussion if you have another question later. So thanks very much to everyone.
Well, thanks, Mr. Anson, for your great session. It was really my pleasure conducting the webinar with you. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a huge success. The recording of the webinar will be available on techgeek.com by evening. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.